Over 200 million people use marijuana. Unlike these three, marijuana is illegal in most of the world, but a growing number of countries have begun legalizing cannabis, first for medical use and now for recreational use. Several U.S. states, such as Washington and Colorado, began legalizing recreational use in 2012. Canada legalized it in 2018. Germany is also about to legalize it, becoming the first country in the European Union. Is this a good idea? And if they continue, should I try it? I warn you, this data will surprise you. Let's get the basics right. Cannabis is a genus of plants, not a genus, meaning there's more than one. Hemp, for example, is a type of cannabis plant you can make t-shirts from. But today, we're not interested in t-shirts, we're interested in chemistry. Cannabis contains two interesting chemicals, tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, and cannabidiol, CBD. THC is the main psychoactive compound in cannabis. It affects perception, cognition, and behavior, and is responsible for getting high. CBD is believed to have medicinal uses. We'll talk about that later. Low THC cannabis is legal in most countries, although limits vary from place to place. Hemp, for example, has a low THC content, meaning your t-shirt is probably legal and there's little point in trying to smoke it. Cannabis plants are dioecious. Male and female plants are different. The highest THC concentration is in the dried flowers of the female plant, so growers weed out the males, whatever their preferred pronouns may be. The use of cannabis is nothing new. Cannabis was one of the first plants cultivated by humans. It was mentioned 4,000 years ago, carved into stone in some of the pyramids. Molecular analysis has found residues in ancient pottery and shows that the Greeks and Romans added it to wine. Almost all ancient languages have a word for cannabis. Historians say the Egyptians administered it orally, rectally, and vaginally. Hopefully this gives Gwyneth Paltrow some better ideas than jade eggs. The irony of the irony. A plant used for thousands of years is now considered illegal. Tobacco companies can kill millions with cigarettes, but a plant is illegal. So what has changed? Cannabis production has drastically increased THC content, and it will almost certainly continue to do so. The THC content of marijuana sold in the U.S. has more than tripled in the last 30 years. In Europe, it's roughly doubled. So the marijuana your kids are getting today is much stronger than what you used to smoke. This complicates the harmless plant argument, because it's not the same plant anymore. There are over 700 varieties of recreational cannabis, with fancy names like green crack, gorilla glue, Death Star, laughing Buddha. Now the problem is, there are also different types of THC, delta 8 and delta 9 THC. They bind to receptors with different strengths, so they have slightly different effects. If Joe Rogan is delta 9, I'm delta 8. Marijuana use is incredibly widespread. According to the UN's 2022 World Drug Report, it's used in almost every country in the world. 20 years ago, men used cannabis twice as often as women. Now the gender gap has almost closed. In the US, nearly 50 million people used it in 2019. It's most common among young adults aged 18 to 25. More than a third use marijuana. North America currently has the highest prevalence of cannabis users in the world, with approximately 17% of adults. Australia follows with around 12%. Usage is much lower in Europe, but it's also increasing. Between 2010 and 2019, cannabis use among European adults increased from 3.1% to 3.9% per month. So, what are the long-term risks? First, smoking isn't good for the lungs in general, no matter what you smoke. Second, cannabis can be addictive. This means some users develop a tolerance to the drug and need to use higher doses to get the desired effect. According to the U.S. National Institute on Drug Addiction, about 9% of people who use cannabis eventually become addicted to it. The risk of addiction increases to approximately 17% for those who start using cannabis in adolescence and to 25 to 50% for daily users. For reference, according to the World Health Organization, in the U.S. in 2016, approximately 14% of people aged 15 and over had an alcohol use problem. This fraction of people who experimented with alcohol and became problematic is approximately 15%. As Canada prepares to legalize recreational cannabis use, the government has commissioned research into the drug's potential harmful effects. A post-research paper published in 2018 presented an analysis of 68 reviews on cannabis. Of these, 62 showed links between the drug and various adverse outcomes. These included impaired driving, increased risk of stroke and testicular cancer, brain changes that could affect learning and memory, and a consistent link to mental illnesses, particularly psychosis. A paper published in The Lancet a few months ago used data from a cohort of approximately 1,000 people in New Zealand. After adjusting for other sociological and medical factors, the study found that long-term cannabis users showed statistically significant accelerated biological aging. They were less adept at managing health, financial, and social demands than non-users. A good way to measure cannabis risk is to look at the number of people hospitalized due to cannabis consumption. In Germany, the percentage of cannabis users has fluctuated around 6% over the last decade. That's approximately 5 million people. Meanwhile, the number of hospitalizations has risen to approximately 19,000 per year. Nearly half of hospitalizations are for addiction syndrome, followed by psychosis and acute intoxication. In the U.S., the number of users has increased slightly, but cannabis-related emergency room visits have increased much faster. Hospitalization numbers are rising rapidly in both countries. The reasons for this are currently unclear. It could be related to regulatory changes or increased THC content. The most common use of cannabis and cannabis-derived substances is for insomnia and pain treatment. Evidence that it works for either of these is, to put it simply, moderate to negligible. A 2021 review article found that THC improved sleep in the short term, but disrupted it with regular use. In 2019, a group of Canadian researchers published a systematic review that examined 72 other systematic reviews. To me, systematic reviews seem like the time of a Ponzi scheme. They found that about half of the reviews were of very low quality. When the analysis was limited to articles that the authors considered medium to high quality, the effect of cannabis on pain relief was small but better than placebo. However, the effects of cannabis are very individual because it affects many different parts of the brain in ways that are not fully understood. The fact that cannabis use is illegal doesn't always make much sense because in some countries, possession and use are not prosecuted. The first and obvious argument against legalizing recreational marijuana is that it is unhealthy. The obvious counterargument is that a lot of unhealthy things are legal. A variant of this argument is that decriminalizing cannabis will lead to more people using it, thus increasing the harm to public health. Indeed, in Canada, they saw a slight increase in cannabis use following legalization, from about 22% to 26% overall. Interestingly, much of this increase came from women. The next argument is that cannabis is a drug that opens the door to worse addictions. Indeed, multiple studies have found that cannabis use, especially when started at a young age, is positively correlated with later abuse of other drugs. But correlation doesn't mean causation. Another concern is that cannabis use increases crime, although there's little supporting evidence. A 2019 paper by a group of American researchers found that legalization in Washington and Colorado had no noticeable effect on crime rates. Then there's the concern that cannabis use increases the risk of traffic accidents caused by driving under the influence. Data from the US and Canada don't support this, but somewhat worryingly, Canada reports a large percentage of cannabis users driving after use, almost a third. But this fraction has steadily decreased across all groups since legalization, indicating that it takes some time for people to adapt to the new laws. Finally, there's the economic argument that if it's legal, you can tax it. Then you can use that money to fill potholes. No wordplay intended. The German government wants to legalize the use and sale of cannabis, but the European Union has laws that make its production illegal. So growing marijuana plants will be limited, at least for now, to 3 plants per adult. Those 3 are female plants. You can raise the boys as much as you want. Nobody cares about them. Should you try me? After reading all these articles, I'm thinking of waiting until I retire, because for now I still need my brain. But since Germans will soon be able to buy and sell cannabis while production is being prevented, maybe now is a good time to find overseas cannabis producers and buy their shares. Ultimately, this is a huge shift. Cannabis legalization isn't just a plant policy. It's a fundamental question of whether anyone has the right to decide what goes into your body. Personally, if cigarettes and alcohol are legal, both far more deadly than cannabis, then it makes sense that cannabis should be legal too. But with stronger THC strains and rise in hospitalizations, it's not as simple a decision as it used to be. Perhaps the real question isn't whether to legalize it, but how to legalize it, because the devil is in the details. And in this case, the details can determine how your brain chemistry changes.